Hey AP Stats, we are going to talk about things that can go wrong in sampling. Okay, so random sampling eliminates bias. In choosing a sample, but even a large random sample will give a result that differs from the truth about the population. There is always some sampling variability. Usually no two samples will produce the exact same results, but most sample surveys are affected by errors, in addition to sampling variability. Okay. So these errors can introduce bias that make a survey result meaningless. Good sampling technique includes the art of reducing all sources of error. There are two main sources of error: sampling errors and non-sampling errors. Okay, so first we're going to go through sampling errors. So sampling errors is one source of sampling error is the use of bad sampling methods, such as voluntary response, which we can avoid. Other sampling errors are not as easy to correct. This type of error occurs when selecting the sample. Okay, so you're going to have to be, you're going to be given situations and it's going to say, is this an example of sampling error or non-sampling error? So sampling error occurs at the time when the sample is selected. That's a key to this, okay? Sampling often begins with a list of individuals from which we will draw our sample, called a sampling frame. Ideally, the sampling frame should list every individual in the population. Because a list of the entire population is rarely available, most samples suffer from some type of undercoverage. Okay, undercoverage occurs when some groups in the population are left out of the process of choosing the sample. For example, a sample survey of households will most likely a sample survey of households will miss not only homeless people, but prison inmates and students in dorms. An opinion poll conducted by calling landline telephones will miss households that have only cell phones, as well as households without a phone. People cannot be covered if they have some characteristic that differs systematically from the rest of the population. Okay, so undercoverage means that not that just a group of people weren't selected to be in your sample, but the difference is that they weren't even on the list that you chose your sample from. Okay, so for example, say I had wanted to take a list of all Oak Ridge High School students. And so I go get a printout of all the names and ID numbers, say, of all Oak Ridge High School students in alphabetical order from A to Z, and I get that from the counseling office. And say they ran out of paper and I missed the last 3 pages. Okay, so I'm sure this list would be, I don't know, say 15 pages long. And they just don't, the last 3 pages don't print. So then but I didn't realize. So I take my list that I have and I randomly select, say, 200 students from the total of, we have 2,600 students. So those 3 pages with last names were probably Y and Z or whatever, the last of the end of the alphabet. They weren't even able to be selected because they weren't on the list that I used to get my sample. Okay, so that's what undercoverage is. It's not just that I had my list and I randomly selected 10 people and I just somehow didn't end up with anybody with a last name of Z. That's fine. That's not an error. That's not undercoverage. What we're talking about with undercoverage is that people are left out of the initial list that you're using to select your sample from. That's what undercoverage is. All right, non-sampling errors. So this is the other type of error. So we have sampling errors and then non-sampling errors. So the error occurs not at the time of sampling. So non-sampling errors are those that plague even a census. This type of error occurs after the sample has already been selected. Okay, so here we go. This type of error occurs after the sample has been selected. So there's not a problem with who was selected, it's a problem after that. One of the most common bias in sample surveys is non-response, which occurs when a selected individual cannot be contacted or refuses to cooperate. Most sample surveys substitute other people in the same area. If the people contacted differ from those who are rarely home or refuse to answer questions, some bias occurs. For example, retired people may be more likely to respond to a phone survey, which would give their opinions more weight. In a poll about Social Security reform, this could give a misleading impression of the population's view. Okay, so this can happen, if you have, even if you're going door to door or calling people, whatever, you're taking a survey at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning. And guess what? A lot of people aren't home at 10 o'clock in the morning. So what do? You substitute somebody else, some other household that is home. So when you do something like that, you are leaving out systematically people of a certain type. So people who work are not going to be included in your survey. Especially if you have a household of a mom and a dad and they both work, and their opinions will not be in your survey, versus if you substitute someone else who is home at 10 a.m., that could be, a stay-at-home mom or someone who's retired, maybe even somebody who works from home. But you're substituting people who were not selected to be in the survey, and they do have different characteristics. The people who are not home are people who have jobs outside of the house and both adults work. So you're going to get different information from people who just have different characteristics. So that is what is called non-response. Okay. Another type of non-sampling error occurs when someone gives an incorrect response. So a systematic pattern of incorrect responses in a sample survey leads to a response bias. Okay, the key to this too is it's a systematic pattern. It's not just one person who lied. Okay, so it's just a systematic pattern. For example, people know that they should take the trouble to vote. So many people who don't vote in the last election will tell an interviewer that they did vote. The race or gender of the interviewer can influence responses to questions about race relations or attitudes towards feminism. Okay, so those types of things are systematically changing how people are responding. Okay, it's not just one person, how one person felt or how one person responded. It's a systematic situation where lots of people are responding the same way because of either the interviewer or the type of question. All right, the third type is the wording of the questions. Is the most important influence on the answers given to a sample survey. Confusing or leading questions can influence strong bias, and changes in wording can greatly change a survey's outcome. Even the order in which the questions are asked matters. All right, so up next is an example. Wording a question in two ways. Can you describe which way the question is biased? So number one, here's two questions. Do you think smoking cigarettes should be illegal? Okay, and same question asked. Smoking cigarettes is the leading cause of cancer and death from cancer, including lung, esophagus, larynx, mouth, throat, kidney, bladder, liver, pancreas, and stomach. Do you think smoking cigarettes should be illegal? Okay, so in this situation, one of them is unbiased. Can we tell which question is unbiased? Yeah, the first one. They just asked a question that was unbiased. So this first question is unbiased. Okay, and what happened in the second question? I mean, they eventually asked, do you think smoking should be illegal? But they gave you all this information ahead of time. So what does that do? That's going to persuade people to answer, oh, yes, we do think cigarettes should be illegal. So they provided extra information to cause people to answer yes. Okay, so the way the question is worded is influencing them to get a response of yes, we do think cigarettes should be illegal. All right, number two, another two questions. With so many violent crimes and domestic disputes ending with gunfire, do you think there should be legislation passed to hinder gun ownership? Okay. Second question. The Second Amendment guarantees citizens the right to bear arms. Should this right be compromised by legislation in the 21st century? Okay, so in this situation, do we have an unbiased question? No, we don't. They are both biased in persuading people to answer different ways. So the first one added this extra information, violent crimes ending with gunfire and domestic disputes specifically. So then they said, do you think legislation should be passed to hinder gun control? Yes. So this is persuading people to answer yes. Okay. And then the second one, the Second Amendment guarantees the citizens the right to bear arms. Okay, so this is persuading people, do you think this right should be compromised by legislation? I mean, even that too. This right should be compromised. And that definitely leads people to answer no. Okay, so in this case, both of them were biased. It wasn't an unbiased question. All right, number 12. What is wrong with the following question? How is it biased? Climate change is one of the most important issues the world will face in the coming years. Do you strongly agree, somewhat agree, disagree, no opinion? What do you think? Is there anything wrong with the actual question? Climate change is one of the most important issues that will face the world in the coming years. Is there anything wrong with stating that? No, that part is fine. Do you notice anything about the options that you have to check off? Okay, do you notice that we have 3 that are either somehow you agree, there's only 1 where you disagree, and then you can have no opinion. So when you have a situation where you've got 3 agree, 1 disagree, what do you think is going to end up happening with your results? Most people are going to somehow agree. So you're offering more opportunities for people to answer yes. Okay. So in some way, you're leading people to answer yes, because there's definitely way more options that fit with either you could agree, somewhat agree, strongly agree, and disagree. You just have to disagree with it. You can't just sort of disagree with it. So the results will definitely be slanted towards somehow agreeing to this question. And actually, this type of example happens a lot. And then the news will just report, 75% of Americans agree. And you're like, wow, that many people agree. But the question was laid out so that you led most people to agree. So when you start to hear information, I want you to, like in news headlines or things like that, I want you to start to think about, like, I wonder how they got that information. I wonder what the question was that actually led to this data or this conclusion. Because a lot of times it's not going to be neutral. They're leading people to answer a certain way. So watch out for that. Okay, so example 13. Each of the following is a source of error in a sample survey. Label each as either sampling error or non-sampling error and explain your answer. All right, so the telephone directory is used as a sampling frame. So is this error going to occur at the time of sampling or at the time of, like, after you already have your sample, non-sampling error? Yeah, this is going to be a sampling error. This is how you're getting the people to use in your sample. So this is going to be sampling error. It's occurring at the time that you're selecting the sample. Okay, so the error occurs at the time of sampling. Okay, so that's a type of error. What kind of problems are going to occur with this? If you're using a telephone directory to get your sampling list, your sampling frame, what type of errors do we think that would occur with this? What's the name of it? Are people going to be left off this list? Yeah, not everybody's in the telephone directory. Some people opt out of it, like we have done that in the past as teachers. Yeah, you can be left off on purpose. You don't want to be part of the telephone directory. Also, if you have a cell phone, most likely you're not going to be in the telephone directory. It's usually for landlines. So lots of people could potentially be left off of your list. So this is called, what is that called when you're left off the list to begin with? Under coverage. Okay, so this will most likely result in under coverage, okay, because those not listed in the phone book do not have the opportunity to be selected. Okay, so those with no landline or opted out, their opinions won't be heard. Okay? They actually don't have the opportunity to be selected for the sample is what it is. Okay, part B, the person cannot be contacted in 5 calls. So they were selected to be in the sample, you've contacted them, you've called and called and called 5 times and they won't answer the phone. Is this considered a sampling error or a non-sampling error? So let's think about this. So the person was selected to be in the sample. So we've already done that. And now you're trying to get information from them. So this is not a sampling error. This is a non-sampling error. So the error is occurring because people are refusing to cooperate. They were selected to be in the sample and then now they're not cooperating. So this is a non-sampling error. Okay, so the person was chosen to be part of the sample. But they did not cooperate. Okay. All right, C, interviewers choose people walking by on the sidewalk to interview. Okay, so what's wrong with that? Interviewers are just choosing people who are walking by on the sidewalk to interview. Is that a sampling error or a non-sampling error? Yeah, the problem with this is that they're not doing like a random selection of people. They're just asking basically a convenience sample of whoever's coming by to answer their questions. So that is occurring at what time? It's occurring at the sampling time. So this is called sampling error. Okay. Who you talk to. Depends on where you are. Okay, so if you're at, like if you're outside a grocery store, if you're in the mall, or you're outside a gas station, you could actually get like different groups of people there. So who your responses come from depends on where you are taking the sample. Okay, also the error occurs with how the interviewer is selecting people. Okay, so that's where the problem is. All right, number 14. The Educational Testing Service, ETS, needed a representative sample of college students. ETS first divided all colleges into groups of similar ones, such as public college, where more than 25,000 students are, small private schools, and so on. Then they used their judgment to choose one representative school from each group, thus obtaining a sample of schools. Each school, in turn, picked a sample of students. So ETS divided the colleges into strata, but did not perform stratified random sampling. Okay, what did they do? There's a couple errors here. So it's not wrong to divide all the colleges into groups of similar ones. That's a good strategy. Okay, so that's fine. But what did they do? They used their judgment here to choose one representative school from each group. Okay, so they were sampling one from each group, but they didn't do that randomly. They just chose one. That's how they got their sample of schools. And then each school, then what else? In turn, then they picked their students. It doesn't say that they randomly selected their students. They picked them. So this is not a good type of sample. And actually, yeah, so it's not a stratified random sample. So let's see, explain the problem here. So first, the ETS used their judgment to choose one representative school. Rather than selecting the school randomly. Okay, and then after that, then they also picked a sample of students rather than selecting the students, rather than randomly selecting. Sorry. Rather than randomly selecting the students at each school. So this will most likely lead to some type of bias. You know, they're most likely selecting students who are not just the average student. They're probably selecting above average students. The school they select in is probably above average, things like that. So it's not necessarily going to be a sample that is representative of how all college students are doing. Okay, since both the school and the students were chosen without the use of randomization. Okay, so the follow-up question is on the next page. Suggest ways to improve this sampling scheme. Okay, well, actually, this isn't just stratified random sampling, because if they randomly select a school, which they should have done, and then randomly select a sample from that, what is that called? It's not actually not, they said stratified random sample up here in part A, but it's actually not even that if you actually randomly select each part. So if you randomly select and then randomly select again, do you know what that's called? It's called multi-stage sampling. Okay, so we're basically going to do the same thing. They're just going to do each step randomly. Okay, so we're going to use a multi-stage sampling technique. Okay, so ETS can use the groups of similar colleges. So that was good that they split the colleges up into categories that were similar. That's totally fine. They said public colleges, small private colleges, etc. However they did before. And then randomly select a college of each type. In each type of category, like we just listed up there. Okay. And then after you do that, then randomly select a sample of students from those colleges. From the chosen college. So whatever you randomly select that college, then randomly select a sample of students. Okay, and why would we want to do that? Why do we use randomization? It helps to reduce systematic bias. Okay, so using randomization helps to reduce systematic bias that could occur by picking what they said, the college and the students. Okay, so you always want to do things randomly. Okay, so we said randomly and then randomly again. And then explain why randomization helps to reduce systematic bias, which is always an important thing. All right, thanks so much, AP Stats.